Dr. Anthony Wolf is a practicing child psychologist in the Springfield, Massachusetts area and the author of numerous child-raising books, including The Secret of Parenting and the best-selling and widely acclaimed Get Out of My Life, but first, could you drive me and Cheryl to the mall? A Parent's Guide to the New Teenager. He is often quoted in the media and has written a regular column on parenting for the Toronto Globe and Mail. He also has written blogs for the Huffington Post and Fox News. He has appeared on many TV shows including The View, The Talk, The Today Show, and CBS Morning, and was featured in a PBS television special on teens. I love those new words. Dr. Wolf has been on the advisory board of the Century Council, a nonprofit organization that combats underage drinking. He is a frequent and widely sought after lecturer for both parents and professional audiences. Known for his ability to describe what actually goes on in real people's homes, for his humor, and for his practical and very helpful advice. It's my pleasure, on behalf of Warren Walker School and We Care, to introduce Dr. Anthony Wolf.
This is a real treat being here, and what I'm going to be talking about today is adolescence. I'm going to be talking about kids today, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about a particular aspect of child development that I think is real important for understanding why our kids act as they do, and have some suggestions as to what you can do maybe to make the process of parenting a little easier. But let me start by saying, I'm talking about teenagers, that there are certain things that you really can't understand about teenage, about being the parent of a teenager, unless you have been the parent of a teenager. And let me give an example, which is to say, I have two kids, they're now grown, but they were born in New York City, and when they were real little, we moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, where I took a job at a child guidance clinic, and worked there for a number of years, seeing kids and teenagers. My two kids are a couple years apart in age. Nick's the older, and as you know, girls tend to mature a little earlier than guys. So that my kids hit their teenage years just around the time when I'd been at this child guidance clinic for maybe 10 years. And I was there and saw a lot of teenagers, saw a lot of parents. So when my kids got to teenagers, my thought was, no big deal. I basically know everything. I have a PhD in psychology. What more is there to know? This is going to be a piece of cake. Anyway, they got to be teenagers. And once they were teenagers, I said to myself, there were certain absolute outside limits past which my kids would not go. And me and my wife, I think, were maybe a little more liberal than some parents, but we both had a pretty tough style to us. But at any rate, once they got to be teenagers, and the limit that I had envisioned, that the absolute outside limit was be somewhere like out here. But then they got to be teenagers, and what you know, the absolute outside limit that they ended up at was somewhere out here. And the thing that only parents of teenagers can understand is the answer to the question, how come? How come if you and your wife were pretty liberal about your limits but thought you knew a lot about raising kids up, how come that the limits ended up so much further out than you would imagine? And the thing that only parents of teenagers can understand is the answer to that question, which is, I don't know. Because what happens is they wear you down. I won 13 arguments with my kid today and only gave up an inch on the 14th, but somehow, and I say this quite seriously, somehow it ends up not really quite how you would imagine. One of the things about being the parent of a teenager, and this absolutely is true, is it's a humbling experience. And it definitely is. Talking about kids today, one of the things that I think isn't quite recognized to the extent that it should be is the fact that there has been an historic, a major dramatic change over the last couple generations. use the word historic because it really was a gigantic change in the way that kids behave and the way that parents parent. And that this has now been a couple generations, but it really has been an historic change. And what that change is, I can describe real quickly. Kid comes into school, and the fact is, the bottom line, which you all know, is that kids today, in a way that did not exist, maybe for all we know in the history of the world, kids today talk back more and not as immediately obedient in a way that's not just a little, there's a giant, giant gap. And what that is about, I can describe real quickly. Kid comes into school, and on his face is the clear imprint of a hand. Teacher says to the kid, Jimmy, where'd you get those marks? And the kid says, my mom hit me. In the United States today, by state law, that teacher has to report that to child abuse authorities. 50, 60 years ago, kid comes into school, clear imprint of hand on his face. Teacher says, where'd you get those marks? Kid says, my mom hit me. Teacher says, not that all teachers would have said this 50, 60 years ago, but they might have. I'll bet he deserved it. Which is to say that there is this dramatic change, an historic change, which is that the more harsh forms of punishment, hard smacks on the face, getting a switch or a belt, those kind of things, parents may still do them, but they no longer are considered acceptable. They're not part of acceptable, but sort of the standard. And what makes it clear that something historic has happened is that the kids know it. Kids today, in a way that did not exist in the past, and I really say this, are not afraid of their parents. And I would say, the parents would say to me, I never would talk to my parents that way. I would say, well, what happened if you did? They said, oh, I didn't want to find out. Well, there was this thing that we decided that we were going to eliminate from child raising sort of more harsh forms of parenting. I think that was a great thing. That was a step forward for mankind. I think not everybody agrees. A lot of people feel maybe this is going in the wrong direction. At any rate, I think that it is true that, sort of give a quick example, that there really has been a change. Mother with a 7-year-old boy and 5-year-old daughter, the mother looking at the two kids, the 7-year-old boy smacks his 5-year-old sister. The mother then goes over to the kid and says, don't hit your sister. Do not hit your sister. People say, well, there, that'll teach him. Well, the old days, people wouldn't have blinked at that. Now, we sort of think a little differently. We think, yes, that'll teach him not to hit his sister when his mother's watching. But that I think everybody in this room would agree that this kid, if his mother on a regular basis used this as a way of making points to her kid, that this particular child, for having been hit in that particular way as part of his child raising, is more, not less likely to himself become a hitter. We now believe that it's not just what you say to a kid, but how you treat them as to how they're going to be. But at any rate, this is what we did. And I think it was a great step forward. Some people aren't so sure, but this is what we had. But nobody will question that there was a little problem with a new way that didn't like harsh punishment. The problem was that nobody knew, because it hadn't happened before, how do human children who are not afraid of their parents behave? We now is more difficult than it was in the past. Well, duh. They had a piece of leverage, a very powerful piece of leverage, that was flat out removed from the parenting arsenal. So that parenting today is more, in that sense, is more difficult, requires more skill, which it really does. If you don't have the more simple way. But, and I should add, I am a big believer in having well-behaved kids. I would have loved it. It never happened, not once, but I would have loved it if I were to say to either of my kids, would you please take a cup into the kitchen, and have them say, yes. Or, yes, sir, as my father used to say to his father. Anyway, this is what we have, and I think it's a very good thing. Fortunately, which I'm going to be talking about a lot, fortunately, there is something that is a particular fact of child and human psychology that helps to suggest that maybe things aren't quite as bad as they seem. And what this is that there's something that if you know about it, it can not only sort of cast the behavior in a more benign light, but also has within it suggestions of what can you do to lessen a lot of the back talk. To eliminate it, you have to go back to the old harsh punishment model. But if you want something that can make a significant, even dramatic difference, there is things that you can do. This particular fact of child-human psychology I'm now going to describe. I am a 7-year-old boy, and I go to school, and I am now coming home, 2nd grade, and I am now coming home. And this is my house. This is the door to my house. This is the outside, this is the inside. Here is a wall, and on this wall is a cocoa that has been lovingly placed at exactly the right height for my cute little 2nd grader's hand. Now, I am now coming home. I open the door, I take off my coat. Here is the cocoa. Stephen, how many times do I have to tell you to hang up your coat? Because I don't know. The kid hangs up his coat. Next day, same kid comes home again, comes to the house, picks up his coat, gives the coat. But on this particular day, his mother, who had yelled at him just the day before about hanging up his coat, is standing right here. And what they do, all of them, is comes to the house, they put the coat. Hi, Mom. How many times will his mother have to tell him to hang up his coat before he learns? The answer is, if he's 7, he's probably in 2nd grade, so what, they graduate high school 12th grade, so 12 minus 2 is 10, times 200. Is it true that even the very last day in high school, both boys and girls come home, drop their coat on the floor? The answer for anybody who's not yet had a kid by getting to the age of graduating high school, the answer is yes, that is what they all do. The point of this story is the second half. The second half is that this same kid goes to school, he's in 2nd grade, and in his school he has a cubby, and in his cubby is a coat hook. And every day, without anybody saying anything to him, he neatly hangs his coat in his cubby. Not all 2nd graders do that, but many do who just as reliably never do it at home. I use this because it is a simple example of a phenomenon that is true of us, is true of kids, is true of teenagers, which is that we all have 2 different sides to us, really like 2 separate, distinct selves. One of them, which is a sort of at-home version of us and of our kids, just wants to unwind, relax, get fed, not have to do anything it doesn't feel like doing. It's sort of the part of us that wants to soak up good stuff. And I talk about it as the baby self. And all baby selves are the same. Kids' baby selves, teenage baby selves, our baby selves. What baby selves want is to be fed now. And the other thing that all baby selves want is that they will tolerate 0 stress. And I emphasize 0. The reason I mention this is that only because if you sort of understand the existence of this baby self can you understand the phenomenon whereby you can say to a kid, would you please move that cup over there? And the kid argues. And he argues for half an hour. And you say, the energy that you just used in arguing, how much energy does it take to move a cup that far? The answer is that if you were dealing with a baby self, which for the most part is who you may get, anything that a baby self does not feel like doing is more than it will or is willing to do. At any rate, there's this other side, which I talk about as the mature self. The mature self is this completely different, separate side of us, side of our kids. And it goes out into the world and functions in a completely different, far more mature manner. The mature selves will delay gratification to work towards a goal. They have better self-control. They're basically this more mature side of us and our kids. And what happens is that in the course of the day, baby self and mature self shift back and forth. And you can actually feel it, the shifting from one to the other. For example, me. Let's say that on a work day, I had to deal with a number of rather difficult clients. But at all times, in dealing with these clients in my mature self mode, I was patient and professional. But now I'm coming home after my really rather did I mention it was a stressful day? Well, it was a really rather stressful day. I'm coming home, and even as I come into the door of the house, you can feel it. It's like your body and energy flows away, and I barely make it to the couch, where if I am lucky, the remote will be within arm's length, because if it's not, I may need assistance. And couples know about this, because you can have one person who has been home and maybe hasn't talked to an adult human the whole day. And there's this person who's coming home who maybe has talked to too many adult humans. But the one who's home wants to tell the one who's coming home about their day. But there's a little problem, because in case you didn't know it, listening requires patience, and baby selves have none. And in fact, what couples learn to do is that they will allow the one who's coming home to have a certain amount of unwinding baby self time before they're going to get to be the good listener. At any rate, these two exist, operating kind of switching back and forth one to the other. Baby selves are good. Baby selves are good. It is only in the baby self mode that our kids get the deep nurturing that we need. I picture it very much like a boxer between rounds who goes out into the world, deals with what's going on out there, and then comes back, collapses, unwinds, gets reinvigorated, and then goes out again. Without a certain place for our and our kids' baby selves, life can be too stressful. And our kids being younger, obviously, we would want to allow more, but we need it as well. And I can give an example, which is, I can remember when my kids were little, that I loved them a lot, but there was a special time that I think I loved them the most, which was when they were asleep. Because they were so cute. But seriously, I can remember, and you probably all experienced the same thing, that I come home, I'm dealing with the kids with what maturity I have left. Finally, they are in bed. And now it is time that I can have my baby self time, which is basically just doing whatever it is that I feel like doing, whatever it seems to be stupid little things, but it's my baby self time, which is why it is such a problem when can Grandma Edith, who died, see me in my room? No, go to bed. But I can hear her breathing. Go to bed. And you can feel it. It's like, I want this time for me. Is it really an intrusion? I need my baby self time. Baby selves are good. We need it. Our kids being younger need more. But there is a little, baby selves are cute, they're lovable, they're funny, but there is a little problem, which I'm going to spend most of the rest of the day talking about, which is that when baby selves are not getting their way, they can be rather less than cute. Let me ask the first question about baby selves and mature selves. If you had a choice, if you go along with the idea that it really is important, at least for your kid, have some place, some time in their life where they're maybe going to have the not so cute baby self side to them come out, wouldn't you rather that time be at home and with you rather than out in the world? It turns out that you do not have a choice. A psychological fact, again known by everybody in this room, is that just the physical presence of a parent brings out the baby self in a child. Now let me give the classic example, which is father comes to pick up his kid who's been staying at a friend's house. Dad, can we go to McDonald's? No, I'm sorry, sweetheart, we're not going to have time. But you said we'd go to McDonald's. I didn't really say, yes, you did. You promised we'd go to McDonald's. Yes, you did. You do this all the time. You make promises. You never do anything because you love them. Which the parent of the other child says, I don't understand. He was so well behaved until you showed up. And then they both conclude incorrectly, oh, he must be tired. Wrong. Had the parent shown up an hour earlier, an hour later, exactly the same thing would have happened. Just the physical presence of the parent brings out the baby self of the child. But this now leads to what's the most important question about baby self and mature self, which is, which of these two, the baby self, which for the most part is who you get to see, or the mature self, who it turns out there seems to be somebody out in the world who apparently resembles strikingly your child, and you know it has the same name, but obviously can't be your kid. These two, the mature self and the baby self, which of these two is a better indicator of who a child really is, and more importantly, they're going to be like this, but some are, with her parents, basically horrible. Always has an attitude. If they ask her to do anything, always gives them a hard time. When they talk to her, there's always a lot of eye rolling and that kind of, just basically very unpleasant. Parents go away for the weekend. Girl goes to stay at the home of a friend. Parents return. About 2 weeks later, the mother of the girl runs into the mother of the friend. And the mother of the friend says, you must be so proud of your Elizabeth. And the mother of the girl says, Elizabeth, whom? And then they establish that they're talking about the same girl. And this really is what happens. I mean, this happens way, way more than not, which is at home there's this not so, can be nice, but often not so nice side. But out there in the world, there's a better, and other people's house, much better behaved version of your kid. And I actually want to clarify one thing that I said. I said the parent brings out the baby self in the child. That's not strictly true. Who brings out the baby self in the child is anybody who is in a regular, nurturing childcare role. So that if you have grandparents who live in Minnesota who see grandkids maybe once or twice a year, they'll tend to get the mature version of the kid. If it's a grandparent who is involved in a lot of day-to-day childcare, they will tend to get the baby self version. And the reason that I mention this is that there's a maybe not quite so nice aspect of this, which is that if you have a two-parent family, what can often happen is that you have one parent who gets the baby self and one parent who gets the mature self. And what this can mean is that you can have two parents who act exactly the same with the same child and get different results. Because one's getting baby self and one's getting mature self. Example, mother and son. Kevin, stop playing with the lamp switch. I'm not hurting him. Kevin, please stop playing with the lamp switch. You want me to experiment with things, I'm just experimenting. Kevin, stop playing with the lamp switch. I'm not doing it. Kevin, stop. You're yelling at me. You always yell. No, I'm not yelling. Meanwhile, in the other room, the father, disgusted again by the bickering between his son and wife, puts down his newspaper, gets up, goes into the other room, turns to his son and says, Kevin, stop playing with the lamp switch, whereupon Kevin stops. And then the father says, which probably has caused at least a few divorces, you know, Caroline, you just aren't tough enough with the kids. And he says, I'll show you what's tough. Anyway, my only point being that you can have two parents in the same family. It has nothing to do with the gender of the parent. It just has to do with what their role in the child raising is. That you have two parents, and one gets baby self, one gets mature self, and they get a completely different response from what they're doing, even though they may be doing the same thing. Going back to the teenage girl who was over at the friend's house, the mother of the friend says, and this really is what happens, the mother of the friend says, she's so polite, and which they really do, she offered to help. And the thing that kills parents of teenagers is that the mother of the friend says, and she's such an interesting girl, and describes how one of the meals, she was talking really very intelligently about how the fluctuation of oil prices globally is probably going to continue making a lot of disruption in the politics of the Middle East. And the mother returns home, tells her daughter the story, and says, why? Why can't you be that way with us? If there's anybody who deserves that, to which the girl responds, because you're mean. Which of these two is the better indicator of who a child really is and who they're going to be when they grow up? Answer, absolutely, the mature self. I mean, it doesn't always happen that way, but way, way more than not. What happens is that they, towards the end of high school, not before, they change and they get nicer. And a lot of this, they go back to be a nicer, better behaved kid. And this happens not because the parents finally figured out something that worked. It happens because the kids move, and it really can seem like a miracle, but they move into the next major developmental stage, which is young adulthood. And it isn't, I mean, and it's not because, finally, on the last day of the kid's career in high school, the father figured out the lecture that worked. Mister, you just listen to me. If you think for a minute, you behave the way you do towards me and your mother, well, think again, Buster, because you will never be able to get a job, you'll never be able to get married, think about that. And the kid says, gosh, Dad, I feel bad for you and Mom, because you only told me that earlier, because it made things a lot nicer for you. No, that's not exactly what happens. And now, the point, I'm going to be talking more about what you do about it, but let me at this point tell a story in regard to, maybe it's the most important single story that I have in regard to baby self and mature self, which is the story of my son Nick and the trash cans. Which is to say, that starting around when he was 7, it got to be his job that on Wednesdays, when he would come home from school, he was supposed to bring in the 2 empty plastic trash cans from the curb and bring them into the garage. And what would happen would be, I would take out, on my way to work on Wednesday mornings, I would take out the full trash cans, leave them by the curb, and then what would happen would be I'd come home Wednesday evenings, and without fail, the full trash cans, the empty trash cans would still be there. And what would happen would be that I would call the Nick, he would come down and bring them in. But often, I know it's not good parenting, I didn't do that because it was so much easier just to bring them in myself and go through the whole thing, getting Nick to do it and all that kind of stuff. But at any rate, it's a totally true story. One day, as he was 14 or 15, I'm coming home from work Wednesday evening, and the trash cans aren't there. And I assume, as anybody would in this circumstance, oh my God, somebody stole our trash cans. I called to Nick, and again, to tell the true story, I said to him, Nick, what's with the trash cans? And he looked at me like I was a total idiot. He said, I brought them in. And I said, Nick, you brought in the trash cans? And again, like a total idiot, he said, yeah, it's my job. And what happened from then on, more or less, and again, it's totally true, he brought in the trash cans. And what I make out of that was that he matured, that what happened, he had always accepted that it was his job to bring in the trash cans. But typically what happened before was that when he got home from school, he immediately switched into his baby self mode, ran inside, got something to eat, turned on the TV, and couldn't stay in his mature self mode for the extra 30 seconds it would have taken him to bring in these, not the heavier metal kind, but the lighter plastic trash can in the distance, not from here to that wall. But at any rate, bottom line is that there really is a design. You sort of look at what's going on and say, well, I'm even trying to develop anything inside my kid, but it's there. Some kids are easy, some are harder, but regardless, this is basically the phenomenon that you're dealing with. Fortunately, now, but then comes the question of, so what does that mean about the baby self behavior? Some kids aren't so difficult, but some kids can be. What's the significance of having this sometimes pretty bratty behavior? Well, for one, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything especially wrong with your kid. Two, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing anything wrong. The main thing about the existence of sometimes pretty bratty behavior from your kid is that it's unpleasant. Fortunately, there is something that you can do that can not eliminate, again, if you want to eliminate the bratty behavior, you have to go back to the old harsh punishment model. But if what you want is to have a significant change, even dramatic change, the amount of the back talk that you get, there is something you can do. And this goes back to the baby self again, which is, I said that all baby cells, I said all baby cells are saying they want to be fed now, they'll tolerate zero stress. There is a third characteristic of baby cells, our baby cells, teenagers' baby cells, kids' baby cells, which is that when a baby cell is not getting its way, failing to get its way, baby cells will keep trying, and they go on and on forever. And I mean forever. Let me give an example. Teenage girl comes to her father and says, Dad, can you give me a ride over to Stephanie's because I have this history project that we're working on and I need to do it with her. And I want you to listen to how the father talks. And I talked earlier about how we now believe that it's how you treat a child that develops our who they're being. So this father, who's always been a very reasonable, kind father, says to his daughter, gosh, sweetheart, you've been sick. It's a school night, and you were out last night, so I'm sorry, honey, but no. And we would assume, as I said, the father's always been nice and reasonable, that she'll respond in some kind of reasonable way, so she'll probably say something like, you're right, Dad, I can still feel some of the congestion from my cold. We can do it over the internet. So thanks for listening. No, that's not what happens is she says, but Dad, you understand, I have to go over to Stephanie's. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Dad. You understand, I have to go over to Stephanie's. No, yes, I do. I have to. She goes on for a while, and then the father says, what I am saying is exactly the correct thing to say. He turns to his daughter and he said, no, I'm sorry, and I do not want to hear any more about it. And then he does what I am saying is exactly the correct thing to do. He turns and he walks away. But he has a typical teenage daughter. One thing, he is going to hear more about it. Two, she will follow. And should he go into a room, close and lock the door, she's going to stand there. Dad, are you in there? Dad, you didn't give me a good reason. You have to give me your dad. And it asks you two questions. She says, one, he said, do you think your father is going to change his mind? She says, no, he's an idiot. Well, then, if he's not going to change his mind, how come you're standing here with your face pressed against the door yelling at her? To which, if she's being honest, she will say, I don't know. And this is the part that you will recognize, which is, at that moment, she is in the clutches of her baby cells. And the way all baby cells operate is, when they are not getting their way, they will go on and on forever. Baby cells, when they are not getting their way, will not let go. They just hang on. What baby cells hate more than anything else is to separate. So just go on and on and on to clean. They don't get their way. And you'll recognize this in adult arguments, especially with people who you're close to, where our baby cells doesn't want to let go, often will come out. In the adult arguments, the voice of the baby cell in our head can sound something like, I have to get her to understand. I have to get her to see my way. We can't just leave this hanging there. We have to get some kind of resolution, namely resolution that I want. And this can go on and on with neither parent. What can happen is, if somewhere along the line, one or the other should have separated, and neither does because they're in the clutches of their baby cell who is going to let go, you can have the arguments ending up going to serious bad places, which leads to, so what do? Answer. When going against the wants of your child, say what you have to say, do what you have to do, and then end, because they won't. What that translates into, when you're going against the wants of your kid, decide fast, stand firm, and then the real tough one, which I'll talk a lot more about, is once you have truly decided, disengage as fast as you can. Decide fast. If you're making taking an unpopular stance with your kid, what you want to do is you want to be able to listen. And if you change your mind, that's excellent. Because changing your mind says to your kid that you're flexible, it says to your kid that you listen to what they have to say. But, as I think all of you know, once you get into a discussion, there's a fairly early point at which the discussion really isn't going anywhere. It just turns into case pleading. And that's the point where, how do you know when you should disengage? You can tell. And the point being, and this is actually quite true, that you can actually feel it. It's like you can feel your blood pressure going up. You say, well, this is maybe where this argument is going to be anywhere too useful. And think about it, that how many people, ever, anywhere, have had the experience with their child where they're taking an unpopular stance and they really want the kid to understand why they are making this unpopular decision. They go on for about half an hour really talking in some depth, trying to get the kid to understand. And how many times has anybody ever had the experience of after the half an hour of this, of the kid saying, I see where you're coming from. Like you and Dad say to me, you can't always get everything your way, but that's something I'm going to have to learn to understand. So, something I'm just going to have to accept. I mean, that doesn't happen ever. So what does that say about the last 25 minutes of the discussion? That mainly it really isn't accomplishing anything, and most likely is escalating because both are getting more frustrated and angry. Anyway, that's the first part, which is you want to decide fast one way or another. The other part, the second one is stand firm. Once you have taken a stand, you really have to stand behind it. The biggest single disaster in day-to-day parenting is if we're on too regular a basis, this will happen with parents all the time, but if too regularly, the kids can ultimately wear their parents down into changing their mind. So that finally, parents who's holding strong, but the kid is just going on and on and on, and the parents is, all right, fine. What it says to the kid is, if I'm really fussing at my parents and it's not working, what I need to do is fuss even more and louder. And so that you really have to think twice about wanting to take a stand if you're willing to see it through to the end. What this has an implication, which is some kids are easy, not so much of a problem, but there's some kids who are difficult, and you find yourself taking a lot of unpopular stands with. One of the things that you have to do if you have a child like that is you have to pick and choose your battles, which is to say, you have to say to yourself, because if all that's going on in the childhood of your child is a lot of being on opposite sides, it's not fair to you, it's not fair to your kids. So you have to be able to say, there's some things that I absolutely do not want to happen with my kid, but I'm going to have to let them go, because I have to make priorities of this thing that I never thought I would give in on, but I'm going to have to because I can't do it on. I have to do what's I have to set, in effect, you have to set priorities. But anyway, stand firm, decide fast, stand firm. It's the third one, which is once you have truly decided, at that point you need to disengage. Because what baby selves do, not only when not getting their way, but they keep on going, but they provoke. They custom tailor what they have learned by trial and experience, what will push your particular buttons and get into one of these escalating baby self arguments. Now, let me tell what is the classic baby self story, which is mother and teenage daughter. Girl wants a new pair of boots, argue for a while, but then the mother says no, and that's it. And the girl, from previous experience, has learned when her mother uses that tone of voice, she, the girl, anything she does is not going to get her mother to change her mind, and is not going to be able to pull her mother into one of these endless back and forth escalating baby self-arguments. So I want you to watch what happens. The mother says to her daughter, no, and that's it. And the girl turns to go. Well, if you have ever gone against the wants of your child, and the kid goes, you have been an excellent, brilliantly successful parent. As I said, the last thing that baby selves ever want want to do is to separate. So if your kid actually turns to go, you have won and you've done a superb job in that instance of parenting. But baby selves die hard. So in this particular case, the girl, even as she has turned to go, her baby self, in one last desperate attempt to rehook her mother, mumbles under her breath, bitch. Whereupon, and I'm not saying that the mother did the wrong thing, but the truth is, what I absolutely recommend is if they say something you feel needs to be strong, don't respond to it at the time, because all that will do is pour fuel on the fire. If there's something you really care about, you wait until a later time, a neutral time, then you go in and you say, I heard what you talked about. Can I talk about whatever it is you want to say? And at that point, but regardless, in this particular case, the mother didn't do what was such a terrible thing, but you have to realize that she now has re-engaged her child's baby self. So what happens is the girl makes a 180-degree turn back to the girl. The mother has said, what did you say? And the girl says, nothing. The mother says, I heard what you said. I do not want you to talk to me that way, ever. Fine. But now she has re-involved the girl's baby self. So what she will get is, I can talk to you any way I want. This is a free country. At that point, the mother absolutely has to disengage, but that's not typically what happens. The mother says, no, as long as you live in this house, under this roof, you will do the behaviors we say. Absolutely not. As I said, they haven't got the baby self, but always have an answer. So the girl says, fine. I called Tricia, and her mother had said I can stay at their house. Can you give me $50 for groceries? And they will always have an answer. I do not back down from what I'm saying. That I believe that if what you want is the least possible fussing, both at the time and overall, there is nothing that comes close to what I'm recommending as being effective other than returning to the old harsh punishment model. One of the reasons that I'm so adamant about it is that it's what I did. Basically, it worked. But I didn't always do it because sometimes my kids would come at me in a newly created, demanding way. Even as I'm yelling at them, the voice in my head is saying, this really isn't what I should be doing, but it's too bad I'm under control. It's useful, seriously. It's useful to say when you do it wrong, it comes out wrong. And if you do it right, it works. And it reinforces itself because you do it and it makes it. And it basically makes you feel, instead of, do this, no I won't, yes you will, no I won't, yes you will. You get into one of these back and forth things where you can feel yourself being pulled into it. It feels much more adult, and it really does. An objection to it that a lot of parents have, understandably, is that if you're not responding to the stuff at the time, don't they feel they are getting away with it? Answer, absolutely not. Because all you have to do is do it, and you see that they hate it. They will say, you're not listening to me, you have to listen to me, you never listen to me, you're not listening. And in fact, you don't say anything. But by even your behavior, what you're saying is, that's absolutely right, I'm not listening to you, and I won't listen to you until such time as you choose to return to the land of the reasonable. Which is exactly the message that you want to give. At any rate, this is what I strongly recommend. It does reinforce itself, it does tend to make things that and it takes a little practice, but if you get good at it, you can see it does absolutely make a difference. This obviously applies to little kids, applies to teenagers, applies to adults, but going on to be talking specifically about adolescence. Adolescence is definitely different than what came before. Adolescence, more or less, is the coming together within a short period of time, a number of major developmental changes, which is to say, one, they get new body, they'll secondary sex characteristics, so that they have this whole new look. If you've ever had the experience, which I have had a number of times, and seeing a kid who I've been seeing for like 3 months or something like that, you say, who is this person? It's a really big change. So they have to deal with the whole thing of having this new body. Second, their cognitive changes. They don't just get smarter, but now they understand things in abstract stuff that's abstract, conceptual in a way that it didn't before. And what this translates into is that they can understand, sometimes you'll be talking, I remember this with my own kids, that they'll start understanding things that you didn't realize they understood, and you sort of have to watch what you say, because you used to be able to sort of talk over their head, but now you can't because they get stuff a lot better than they used to, and that's a developmental change. Third change, obviously a huge one, is that they develop sexuality. Not just the ability to reproduce, but they now have sexual feelings, and the world becomes sexualized. So that it is clearly a gigantic change that changes their life forever, basically. Fourth change, and there's this fourth change, which is a purely psychological one, that more than anything determines why teenagers act as they do, and especially why they act as they do towards their parents. What this fourth change is, that coming as part of normal psychological development, coming into the mind of the now teenager, is the idea that it is no longer acceptable to me to experience myself as a dependent little kid. I have to see myself as an independent, adult-like being. And that makes sense, because not too many years they have to go out into the world and they still see themselves dependent little kid. That's going to be a problem. But at any rate, this is what happens. But there's a little problem, which is, up until this time, there is a person or persons to whom they still have very strong love, attachment, dependency feelings. But now, those love, attachment, dependency feelings are no longer acceptable. So they now have the situation, by the end of adolescence, often what happens is they do develop a lot of emotional independence. But especially early in adolescence, they still have these strong love, attachment, dependency feelings, but they're no longer acceptable. What you have is the classic situation of adolescence, which I shall now describe. I am a 15-year-old boy, and I'm sitting in a room by myself on a couch, and I'm watching television. For those of you in the back who can't see me, I'm very relaxed. And now, coming into the room, saying nothing, is my mother. And immediately, I'm not relaxed, and I would like it if she would leave, which if she doesn't, I'll go back to being relaxed. And you can see this both with boys and girls. You're watching through a one-way mirror or something that kid is relaxed, parent comes in immediately. They're obviously not relaxed, parent needs to go back to being relaxed. What's happening, this is not an intentional thing on their part at all. What this is about is that the parent coming into the room brings out in them the love, attachment, dependency feelings, but now they have those inside their body, but they're no longer acceptable. And what you actually have is a feelable tension on the part of the kid. That's there. As I said, the parent needs to go back. It just comes the parent being there and bringing out the kid's love, attachment, dependency feelings. But in this particular case, the mother does a terrible thing. She speaks. She says her son's name, James, and he says, "What?" And she said, "Don't talk to me in that tone of voice." He says, "What tone of voice?" And they kind of go from there. My only point with this is, the kid is sitting here in the room, very relaxed. He's done his homework. He's in his allowable baby self time. Here the mother has come into the room, is completely ruining his nice, relaxed baby self time. But now, not only does she come into the room, but she is staying in the room. And not only is she staying in the room, but she is speaking. And when you are in that kind of a situation, it's very difficult to talk in a kind of relaxed and friendly manner. But now I'm going to turn it into a horror story. Because on this particular day, the mother decides that she is going to have some quality moment. So she goes over to the couch where her beloved son is sitting, and she puts her arm around him. And the poor kid is so uncomfortable that he gets up and he leaves. And the mother is devastated. She's heartbroken. She was just reaching out to her beloved son, and she feels very rejected, which she really was. And one of the facts about adolescence, not with all kids, but with a lot, that they're going to their adolescence can be a loss. There's a relationship with them, and they're very nurturing one of us, particularly girls writing lots of "I love you, mommy," those with hearts and smiley faces, and daddy, and all this kind of stuff. That sometimes can just leave. And it comes back, as I said, at the end of adolescence, but they never can be, they're never quite the same huggy pumpkins that they were before. But regardless, if if there is one point that I would make about adolescence, it is as follows, which is, think about what would have happened if the boy had come into the room, if the boy in the room was like 9 years old, and his mother had come in, sat next to him and put her arm around him. At 9, he might well put his head on her shoulder. And let's say, as usually is the case, in the intervening years between 9 years old and his teenage years, the mother had done nothing especially wrong. She'd been a good mother. What happened to change this child from a loving, affectionate kid to one who literally could not stand being in the same room as his mother? Answer, with the dawning of adolescence, they develop as part of normal development. The great majority of them develop a temporary allergy to their parents. And they really do. Everything about their parents aggravates them. Dad, you have to breathe that way. Well, the poor father has never been so conscious about his breathing. He is for the rest of his life. At any rate, as I said, it can be a loss. A kid comes home from school, a little kid comes home from school. Mom, remember my leaf project blew away, so I had to borrow this other kid's leaves. They were just kind of crumpled leaves. And same exact kid now in high school comes in, mother sitting over there, the kid doesn't come here. Jimmy, what? I want you to come back here. What is it? I want you to tell me about your day. I had lunch, okay? Anyway, another point that I should make is that in regard to this basic adolescent dilemma, which is, what do I do about the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings that I have towards my parents? That the solution to that does differ with the gender of the child. You can have the opposite of what I'm going to describe, and it's normal, but there really is sort of basic teenage boy and teenage girl solution to the problem. What do I do about the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency towards my parents? Typical 14-year-old boy goes into his room, closes the door, turns on all his electronics, and comes out for supper and high school graduation. Which is to say, the classic teenage boy thing is that it is very much like a wall that comes down. And it lifts, as I said, that adolescence does end, and it can seem like a miracle. But when I think back, I was one of those kids. I was a good example because I was a chatty little kid. But during my teenage years, and I was happy because it was something to remember, is that there was a sort of joke in the family that during my teenage years, I only had one word that I said, and that word was fine, which is to say, they ask me any kind of question, how are things, what's going on, and say everything is fine, which is the single word that I can sort of dismiss what they say and not going to deal with. At any rate, and teenage boys, not only teenage boys want to absent themselves, even when they are with you, teenage boys, a lot of them develop a particular style of being absent even in your presence, which is the classic teenage boy way of talking, which is, and the parents say, gosh, we haven't noticed this before, but maybe we should consult a speech pathologist. And they ultimately decide not to because there's a kind of hint that there's something else, which is, he is, after all, president of the debate team in school. So there must be some other kind of issue involved. Anyway, that's sort of the classic teenage boy solution to adolescence. Teenage girls, and it's with teenage girls that there really is the bigger surprise and the greater disruption, which is that a lot of the girls have been very sweet, that it changes. And often what teenage girls do in solution to what do I do about the unacceptable love, attachment, dependency feelings towards my parents is that they declare their independence moment by moment in your face. Which is to say, the teenage girls will tend to disagree or yell at just about anything that's going on. And it goes back and forth because let's say I just screamed at my mother for half an hour and now I'm feeling pretty independent. Now I can sort of feel close with them. Talk about what was it like for you in high school. I was saying, this is so nice. Why can't this stay? Which of course it doesn't. But teenagers, there are a lot of paradoxes with this, which is the teenage girl's way, which can be more disruptive and on a day-to-day basis around the house, because the boy's all the time in his room, you worry about what's going on, but he's not disturbing anybody as best as you know. girls, but the girls' way, even though it can be more stressful on a day-to-day basis for parents, is way better for them. So more psychologically healthy, because teenage girls, compared to teenage boys, have a lot more emotional contact with their parents, and they get more support, although sometimes demanded. The guys do. If a teenage boy has a problem, typically who they get to go to, who they talk about it, is basically nobody. You know, Brian, I haven't been that confident about myself lately, and you know my teenage girls, if they have a problem, typically you will get to hear about it. And that really is to their advantage. One thing that I'll mention, which is, and this has been going on for a pretty long time, one of the flat-out benefits of the use of the internet is that teenage guys now, many, will have a friend, usually a girl who they are friendly with, who they talk about things that they never talked to anybody about. And it's definitely very real plus. At any rate, this is what teenage guys do, this is what teenage girls do, which leads to a question. And the question is, how much should I respect this pushing me away by my kid? And you can actually feel it. I mean, it almost is like a force field emanating from them. They want you to keep your distance. My answer to that is you should respect it, but only to a point. I'll give an example. I am a big advocate of giving one's teenagers hugs. Now, it doesn't have to be a long hug, but a real hug, not a little jail hug, you go and give a quick. They hate it, but at the same time, I say this quite seriously, they like it very much. The message that they get is that even though I'm not enjoying this at the moment, it does say to me, my parent still loves me. My parent loves me despite all that goes on. There is this thing that transcends, and that's the right word, that transcends the sort of day-to-day living experience of us together. It goes above that, and this is really important to kids, and they really do like it. It's something that they have, that they definitely care about. It's really part of a stance with teenagers that I'll describe a little, which is in response to a lot of the day-to-day unpleasantness. That one of the things, and I actually had a phrase for it that I remember with my kids, not that I always did it, but I did do it sometimes, which I referred to myself as competing melodies. That is to say, if they were going to be crappy, I have the option, the parent has the option, of responding in harmony to their crappiness. So they're being crappy, and the parent says, you know what I should do? I should videotape 24 hours of you in the house. You know what you get to see? You get to see what an unpleasant person you are. And maybe you would learn to change that. Well, that really doesn't work. Is what I decided somewhere, I don't know the conscious decision, but I sort of said to myself, what I'm going to try and do is, I don't want their crappy moods to dominate what's going on, so I'm going to have this competing melody that has to say my upbeat, and see what happens. And the story I'm not going to tell, maybe I did this once for real, maybe I did, I think to some extent I must have, but this is a good characterization of what actually went on, which is, son comes down for breakfast. What's for breakfast? French toast. I hate French toast. Well, at that point, I have an option. I can say, well, I'm sorry that you hate French toast, but you know what? There are thousands, maybe millions of starving children who would give anything to have those two pieces of French toast. So, you know, well, again, I'm not advocating that. I'm advocating this other thing. And this is an example of what maybe actually happened in some form, which is, son comes down and says, what's for breakfast? I say French toast. He says, I hate French toast. I say, you know, I love French toast. In fact, it's my favorite breakfast food. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sing a French toast song. I love French toast, don't you? I love French toast, don't you? I said, oh my God, I'm an idiot for fathers, crazy person. But that's the way kids respond to that. If you stay with it, you sort of build this counter to what they do. They're not going to change. What they do is they laugh and they say exactly like I say. I have the weirdest father in the world. And kids are very comfortable with that. That's a stance that they take. They're not giving approval to their parents, but that they're also, and it comes, you see it, as they're standing there and they're saying, my father is the biggest idiot in the world, and I can't actually be with him in public because he's so weird. At the same time they're saying that, there's also a sort of underlying love that you actually feel and think you can pull it off. And it's not something you can always do, and if their crabbiness has to do with things that are going on that are bothering them, this is not going to work. But sort of the standard response to their crabbiness, which they need to do to put you in a distance, and you absolutely not responding to it, but acting in a different way. No, I'm going to have our relationship be upbeat as much as I can have that happen. Another example, father comes to his son's room. Can I come in? No. Well, as you know, it's Tuesday night, and it's time for our weekly father and son chat. So, I'm going to begin, because you never do. And to remember, this is really interesting, I'm sure I'll be interested in this. Oh my God. Remember I told you about the restaurant that I went to last week that had the pea soup, and it was really, really good. I went back there. Oh my God. I went back there this week, and I had the pea soup again. It was terrible. I don't know what the problem was. Oh my God, I can this happen. But it really has the same idea, which is to say that I'm the stupid idiot parent who likes them that much and keeps on hanging in there, rather than responding to it, which is more often the thing that parents sort of give up because I can't say the right thing to my kid. Well, the answer is that there are things that can be right and civil, and it's really part of a stance, which is almost like a mantra. You don't say this, but you can sort of think it, which is, I know you can't stand me, but I also know that that's just part of normal development, that deep down you still love me, there's a strong attachment between the two of us. Not only do I know that it's not true that you can't stand me, but I know that it's not personal. Yes, it is personal, it's you. No, it's not personal. Not only is it not personal, but I really like being with you. Aren't we having a good time? And this stance, and if you think about it, if you can sort of, and it really is incredibly useful. Again, this does not come into play, it does not work, and you have to be able to sensitive to that, where you're going against what they want. You can't jolly them out of the fact. You said, no, you can't go out on such and such a night, or no, I'm not going to do such and such. But that for just the day-to-day teenage crappiness, it really is, and it makes it much nicer for both you and for them. I think I'm going to talk about a couple things in regard to day-to-day parenting with teenagers that I think can be helpful, which is to say, what do you do in regard to when you're taking a unpopular stance with them and you want them to understand that you're right. If, in dealing with teenagers, if the basis of your parent authority, the basis of the ongoing situation between you and your kid, and you making unpopular decisions, if the basis of your authority is based on that you are right, that ultimately is a disaster. Because if whoever is right is the one who gets to have it be their way, what's going to happen is they're going to argue into the ground, because it's not a question of, it goes on and on and on. And ultimately, what parents shy away from is, I'm doing this because I'm the boss. And it's not, it sort of feels that way. Ultimately, what seems to work better and is more practical is that, yes, you want to listen, yes, you can change your mind, all the things that I spoke of, but there does get to be a point, because if you keep on going on and on and on, it's just not going to work. That's the point where you say, this is what I've decided. And I'm not saying I'm right, I'm not saying this is what's best for you, but this is what I've decided. And the unspoken is, I'm your parent, I care about you, I'm making decisions based on what I think is best for you. And for me, sometimes I'm going to make selfish decisions in my favor, but basically this is, I'm doing this because this is what I've decided. And it drives them crazy, they get real mad. My parents never listen to me. Well, if you listen to as much as they want, as I've said again and again, if you listen, if you try and convince them that you're right, that'll just get you in deeper and deeper. So there has to be a point where, certain kind of situation, you say, no, I'm sorry, and that's it. And that's like the beginning of them starting a whole new onslaught. But at that point, you have to disengage. And that really does work a whole lot better than just. Another issue with teenagers, particularly as they get older, is the issue of trust. It's real important. Teenagers feel it's real important that you can trust them and that they feel that. But at the same time, teenagers lie a lot. So how do they reconcile? How can you reconcile the fact that let's say you have this great kid who grows up to be a wonderful person, is a wonderful person, but still lies a lot. Why do they lie so much? A lot of different reasons, but one of them is that there is an unbridgeable gap between teenagers and their parents. And the gap is that as a parent, I want my kid to be safe. What my kid wants is to have a good time. And those two things really are, if I want to do certain kind of things, I can't really say to my parent, well, the party I'm going to next Saturday night, if it's anything like the ones we've had before, I'll probably get drunk. I don't know, maybe something with some senior, I don't know. Just kidding, I'll have apples and read poetry. Oh, thank God. I always knew that what was going on. It is a fact that this is something that I've been sensitive to since I've been seeing teenagers, which is wherever they do any kind of surveys, invariably what they show is that teenagers' parents significantly underestimate the naughty behavior that the kids are doing. Their parents are not as aware of what goes on. And not saying that what do you do about it or increase the surveillance or not, but you don't want to be too naive as to what you sort of have to have a certain amount of skepticism sitting in your head saying maybe this is true, maybe it's not. And maybe you have to make some decisions based where you're not trusting them correctly or not, but that you feel in your role as a parent, this is what I have to do. And there's an issue around trust because I want to be able to trust my child, but you also want to have a realistic sense that they may, despite looking you right in the eye, they're very, very good at this. They say, no, I won't. I swear to God, Grandma, not a soul. Well, but I really wanted to go. What else am I supposed to say? That seems to slow my parents down. But anyway, I think I'm going to mention one more thing, and then I'm going to stop and open for any kind of questions or comments people may have. But this is that adolescence ends. As I said, it can seem like a miracle. Or just the end of high school, they change, they really do. And they will start coming back at you with things that you had said years before. That you weren't strict enough. I mean, you didn't know what was going on out there. You allowed me to do this kind of stuff. I didn't exactly allow you, you didn't know that. And famous thing is the way older teenage siblings can be with their parents about the younger teenage sibling warning the parents. It's how they're not being strict enough, they're not being surveillant enough because they don't know what's going on out there. Or, kid says to her mother, remember that party at Veronica's when I was 13? You should not have let me go. there were boys, there was drinking, and her parents were not there. And don't you remember you had her disguise her voice as her mother? Well, you should not have believed that. Anyway, adolescence can seem like, it does come to an end, it can seem like a miracle. And a point that, and I'll stop with this, is that if you're concerned about, is my kid going to grow into a monster or something, the best thing to make as a predictor is not so much taking any given slice of time with you and your kid at home over the course of their adolescence, but better than looking at any specific behavior or not, is looking at yourself. And you can say that you as a parent have basically been a supportive, loving parent, not all the time, and you're always perfect. Sometimes you act exactly the opposite you want, but that you did that, but that also you were at times willing to make unpopular decisions. That you were willing, and this could be very tough for a lot of parents, that you're willing for your child, at least for a little period of time, to hate you because you made a particular unpopular decision that they really, really truly do hate. But if you're willing to sometimes do that anyway, you can say yes to both of those two things. The odds are strongly in your favor that your kid is going to turn out fine. And it really does work that way.